So I have the opportunity this morning to address my Dhamma friends, Dhamma family, and I assume we're all friends here, family, not enemies. So friends are people who, worldly friends are people who agree with us or have similar views to ours and similar aspirations. I would say Dhamma friends we also have similar aspirations, but then we try to help each other, encourage each other in the Dhamma practice, Dhamma lifestyle. And today is Monday, September 24th. The 24th today. And yesterday, the 23rd, was commemorating 5 years since Yatiko's brother took his life in Canada. And Ajahn Naniko spoke to that yesterday. And today we're remembering Ming Fong Tien, who took her own life a few days ago in Taiwan. And so we did some Paritta chanting. Paritta means protection. There's 2 types of chants that we do, and there's what's called the Mangala chants, so the auspicious chanting, and the Paritta chanting falls into that, and we do for house blessings or protective ceremonies or consecration ceremonies. We do the Mangala, in Thai the Mongkon chanting. Then there's another type of chanting, the inauspicious chanting, which is the Avamangala, or in Thai the Avamongkon, the inauspicious, which we would normally do for within 3 days of a death or to commemorate like on a regular commemoration, 7 days, 49 days, 50 days, a year of, say, a passing away of somebody. So kind of had the choice to do either the Mongkon or the Ava Mongkon chanting this evening. And figured it was a Wan Pra with a number of people who probably aren't so familiar with the funeral chanting. Just comes from the Abhidhamma. And 2, this chanting is not just for someone who just passed away, but it's also for the family and the friends of that person. So we figured, let's do some Mongkon, let's do some Mangala chanting this evening. And also, just in my opinion, the Abhidhamma chanting, if the deceased spirit by some chance was listening, then I thought this particular chanting, the things like the Metta Sutta, the Mangala Sutta, this might be a bit more helpful than reciting a really long list of Dhammas. Even though that's the tradition, and that tradition comes from the beautiful story of the Buddha wanting to go to Sita heaven to teach his mother. So his birth mother, Queen Mahamaya, who passed away 7 days after giving birth to the Bodhisatta. So this story of the Buddha actually going to spin the vasa in heaven to teach his mother, and that's apparently where the Abhidhamma comes from. And so since the Buddha's mother passed away and the Buddha spoke the Abhidhamma for her, then we have this funeral chanting that we do as a tradition, reciting verses of Abhidhamma to benefit, say, deceased spirits. But we also recognize in a practical sense that that funeral chanting, if we look at it realistically, it may not always be the most helpful thing for a particular deceased spirit. Not everybody has the same barami as the mother of a Buddha. So things like the Karaniya Metta Sutta, so spreading loving kindness, recollecting the Ratana Sutta, which is for dispelling calamities. Thought that might be more helpful this evening. So when we contemplate people taking their own lives, then we come to the question, which many of us ask, which is just, what's the point? What's the point of living if we're just going to die anyway? What's the point of all our plans and hopes and aspirations and dreams if it just ends in death? And this is the same question the Bodhisatta asked before he left the palace. What's the point of it all? But before he was really able to embark on a spiritual quest, so there's a couple of ways we can react to this question of what's the point. One is we can just give up. Two is we can embark on a spiritual quest, a spiritual journey, a search to find the point. What's the point? Well, maybe if I search, maybe I'll find it. But before the Bodhisatta was able to really clearly ask this question and also pursue a possible answer to this question, he needed to notice certain things about the human condition first and really internalize them. So as the story goes, the Bodhisatta, the prince, Siddhartha, was surrounded by the finest fineries, the finest pleasures. His 3 palaces, one for the hot season, one for the cold season, one for the rains. And his palace for the rains, he was attended to by only female slaves who were, even though they were termed slaves, they were treated and ate better than the aristocracy of the outside of even the rich people outside of the palace weren't treated as good as the prince's slaves in his rains palace. So it gives you an idea of just how refined his lifestyle was. And so from time to time, his Chana, his charioteer, the prince would want to go to these pleasure parks, so these nature reserves, nature areas, just to see the sights, and then inevitably he'd pass through some villages and some human habitation to get there. Of course, the king Suddhodana was very, very careful to protect him from seeing any suffering or seeing anything unpleasant. So it just so happens the prince with his charioteer, they're heading out to the pleasure park one day, and as the story goes, the prince Siddhartha sees a sick person on the street, and he's never seen sickness before, and so we can assume that this was a very sick person, probably a disease like leprosy, or for anybody who's been to India, it it's right out in the open usually. So this person probably had some sort of very visible illness. So the prince asking, well, "What's that? What's wrong with him?" And Chana, the charioteer, answering, "Well, that's sickness. That's a sick person. Everybody gets sick, and it's just part of the human condition." And so the prince, the bodhisattva, reflecting to himself, I'm of the nature to sicken. I'm not freed from that. I'm human as well. I am of the nature to sicken. I'm not freed from sickness. And at that moment, seeing that aspect of the human condition, all intoxication with health faded for him. And so he returns to the palace, more sober, contemplating sickness. Well, what's the point if we can get sick? So another time he rides out to his pleasure park, and a similar occurrence, but seeing a very old person. Probably because the prince would have been in his mid to late 20s at the time, seeing an old, well, we can assume that he probably saw this not too long before he left home, so it would have been his late 20s. So seeing an old person with a bent over with a cane with broken teeth, probably nearing the end of his life. And so the prince seeing this, and what's wrong with them? Oh, that's an old person. So he's been surrounded by youth. He's in the palace, so kind of like, well, you're going to have to get old too. So the prince is seeing this old person, thinking, I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. I too am of that fate. And at that moment, the intoxication with youth fades for him. So returns to the palace, more sober than before, thinking, what's the point if we're just going to age? So on another later future pleasure outing to these parks, passing by a dead person. So seeing a dead person, the prince, having been sheltered from death, never seeing death, asks, well, what's wrong with him? What's wrong with that person? Why aren't they moving? Why are they just lying on a board, completely still, not breathing? And the charioteer says, well, that's a dead person. Everybody who's born has to die. Everybody knows that. It's just completely normal. And so the prince thinking, well, I'm of the nature to die as well. I've not gone beyond dying. And at that moment, the intoxication with life fades for the Bodhisattva. And he returns to the palace again, thinking, well, if we're born just to die, well, what's the point? So more sober than before, and starting to feel a sense of sadness, a sense of spiritual sadness at this point. Like, well, sickness, aging, and death, and having left behind the three intoxications of intoxication with youth, intoxication with health, intoxication with life itself, having left behind those three intoxications, but yet not yet seeing the way out, not yet seeing a way forward. So the prince is in a very pensive state at this point. So he's thinking about these things, and he's kind of like, okay, well, it's probably not going to do much for me, but let's head out to the pleasure park again. So they're heading out, and this is when, as the story goes, he sees a monk, a samana in brown robes, sitting at the foot of a tree. And he asks, hey, what's that? What's he doing? That's unusual. And the charioteer answers, well, that's a samana. He's someone who seeks the deathless. And he seeks nibbana. He seeks a end of the round of rebirth. So the prince thinks, that's good. This is something good. I like that. So he develops saddha, he develops faith at this point. And upon hearing the word nibbana, also stirred something very deep inside of him. And he was reminded of a time when he was younger. Everybody's in love with Prince Siddhartha. So ever since he's born, he's got auspicious signs. He's handsome, as strong. Anything he does, he masters any skill quickly. And there's a story when he's in his teens, 16, 17, 18 years old, something like that. He's walking through the palace grounds, and one of his elder female relatives, upon seeing him walking through the palace grounds, expresses this song of joy at how whenever people see Prince Siddhartha, they're nibbindati, their mind cools down and they feel at ease. And when he's walking around the palace grounds, he doesn't hear the song, but he overhears this word nibbindati, and it stirs this deep feeling in him. And so this, hearing the word nibbana again upon seeing the monk, it stirs that same feeling, like there's something there. So what's the point? So he's thinking, well, what do I do now? I'd like to become a monk, but there's just one problem. He's a prince, heir to a kingdom, and his child was born that day. So when it's soon after he's seen this monk, and he gets word that a son has been born to him. So They say, well, what you have to name the son. What's the name of your son? And the Buddha just utters the word Rahula, which means bondage. So he's recollecting, this is a bond for me. Now in India at that time, and the custom would have been, as soon as a son is born to a prince, then the prince actually becomes the king the next day. And the current king then steps down. So for him, it's now or never. He has to leave the palace that night, or else he's going to be crowned as a king the next day. So he's got all these questions that need to be answered, and he's got one chance. If he's going to leave the palace, it has to be tonight. So it's late at night. His wife Yasodhara and his child Rahula, they're asleep. It's late. The night is advanced, and he's got to go. And so he makes a decision to leave. And this is a very, very difficult decision. The decision that the Bodhisattva made at that point, it's related later in the suttas, where they say he left behind his wife and child and his land. And these things were not just of the average kind, but they were of the best kind. So he left behind the best. He had the best of everything. Later on, the Buddha giving teachings, he says, sometimes when people leave home, they leave behind a wife not of the best kind and a child not of the best kind, but I left behind a wife of the best kind and a child of the best kind, and a home of the best kind. Sometimes people leave home out of an aversion for the situation that they had, but the Bodhisattva left home out of a deep longing to see the truth and to find he left home out of compassion that there might be some possible way to overcome death somehow, that he could seek the deathless. So this is pretty incredible, and I've even heard people criticize the Bodhisattva for this act, for leaving his wife and child behind. The Buddha was a jerk. But yet we have to look at the eventual final result of this, is that both his wife and his child both became arhants in that very life. Just the far and away the best possible thing a father could give, the best possible thing a husband could give to a wife, and the best possible thing a father could give to their son. And later on, the Buddha teaching his ailing father at the time of his father's death, the Buddha returning home and teaching his father for 7 days and 7 nights, and his father achieving arhantship on the 7th night. And so the son doing the best possible thing a son could do for their father. And then the Buddha, as the story goes, also going up to Sita heaven to teach his mother, who passed away 7 days after his birth, and the son doing the best possible thing he could do for his mother as well. So because of that act of undergoing a deep spiritual search and the eventual result of Buddhahood, then there's so many levels to this. There's not only did the Buddha teach and benefit countless millions of people over the past 2,600 years, but also gave the example of the best possible father, the best possible husband, the best possible son. So just raising up what we call the aga, the best, what's truly the best. You could say he left what we consider the best in the world, and he found what was truly the best. So he leaves the palace, and I love contemplating this imagery, and a lot of these contemplations of the Buddha can actually come up when we recite Buddho in the meditation. This is why we do it. This is Buddha Nusati. All these feelings of, like the word nibbana, what does it bring up for us? Or stilling, peace, what do these things evoke for us? So Buddho, like in a Buddhist culture, when people recite Buddho in their mind, it brings up these types of reflections, this incredible faith. So the Bodhisattva leaves the palace. He's got these ornaments and jewels, and his horse, his charioteer, is leading him again. Chana is leading him out of the palace, and he's got his long hair, and as he's riding, he knows he's got to go to the next kingdom. If he doesn't go to the next kingdom, so he's got to leave the kingdom of Kosala and get to the kingdom of Magadha, or else the armies can pursue him. So ideally, he would get to the next kingdom around dawn time, and then he's free to be a monk. They won't be able to pursue him into the next kingdom. So as he's riding out towards the Anoma River in the east of the kingdom of Kapilavatthu, he's taking off his ornaments, ripping off his ornaments and tossing them away one by one. So this incredible image of the renunciation and how he's giving up as he's riding out. And then they finally get to the river. It's a long ways, it's about 80 miles. And gets to the Anoma River, crosses the river, and then says goodbye to his charioteer and his horse. And then actually the charioteer takes the horse back, so they've left the Bodhisattva, and as kind of an aside, the horse then passes away from a broken heart, or it could have been because it rode for so long. It's not sure. His heart may have broken due to the physical exertion as well. And then the Bodhisattva takes his knife, which everything connected to him has a name in the Thai version of the story. So the horse is named Kandaka, and the knife is named Kun. So he takes his knife, Kun, and he shaves his head with this knife. And doesn't really say he got rid of it, so we can assume this is maybe the origin of one of the 8 bhikkhu requisites, the razor knife for shaving the head. And then, according to the Thai version of the story, and we can only speculate as to what happened after this, apparently his hair floats up in the air, and then Lord Sakka comes down and enshrines it in a reliquary. And there's some sort of pagoda in heaven somewhere with the Bodhisattva's hair from his renunciation enshrined in it. And he takes on the rag robes of a homeless ascetic wanderer, becomes the ascetic Gotama. Seeing that this will be the lifestyle, he can try to answer the question, what's the point? And there's some really lovely exchanges that happen right at the beginning of his practice. Even before he goes to see his first teacher, Alara Kalama, he takes on and trains himself in the alms round. So he has an old alms bowl, and he undertakes the alms round, the Pindapata practice, as a wanderer. But his bearing he's probably the most accurate account, Ajahn Jeff's reckoning, is the Buddha was about 6'7", and so he's tall, has a noble demeanor, yet it's this strange juxtaposition of a noble prince having shaved off his hair and beard and taken on robes and living as a homeless ascetic. And going on the alms round, people are in awe of him. And this is where the meal reflection comes from. In those early days of the alms round, then he's mixing all of his food together, something he's never done before in his life. And so he's got all the food just mixed together in this bowl. And he feels, okay, this is appropriate. This is appropriate for one who is attempting to relinquish all sensuality in pursuit of something higher, in pursuit of nibbana. And he reflects, I use this alms food not for fun, not for pleasure, not for putting on bulk, not for beautification, only for the maintenance and nourishment of this fathom-long body, for keeping it healthy, for sustaining my life so I can live the holy life. So thinking thus, I will allay hunger without overeating, so I may continue to live blamelessly and at ease and in comfort. This recollection actually comes from those first days of the Bodhisattva striving. And also early on, something that happens before he even goes to his first teacher is King Bimbisara, with his entourage, going to his pleasure park. So the Bodhisattva is hanging out in King Bimbisara's pleasure park now. And King Bimbisara, king of Magadha, is stricken by this appearance of this noble-looking monk and approaches him and says, and this is out of the suttas, these verses can actually be found in the Life of the Buddha by Nyanamoli Thera. He's gathered these particular verses of King Bimbisara and his exchange with the Bodhisattva at that time. And it's something like, he says, your demeanor is noble. Where are you from? Who are you? And then the Bodhisattva answering, well, I'm from the kingdom of Kosala, from Kapilavatthu, and I was raised in the most refined way possible. But now I seek something even more refined, something even greater. And King Bimbisara says, well, you have more barami than me. I offer you my kingdom. You should run this kingdom. It shouldn't be me. So he's got this immense faith that's arisen at that moment in the Bodhisattva. And then the ascetic Gotama answers something like, an entire kingdom filled with heavenly pleasures I leave behind like spit in the dust. no longer striving towards such things. And so, of course, King Bimbisara gets even more faith hearing this and says, well, if you attain your goal, can I be one of your first disciples? And will you teach me? And the ascetic Gautama just nods and kind of perhaps silently agrees. And that is what happens after the Buddhahood, under the Bodhi tree. King Bimbisara is the first king disciple of the Buddha. So there were many wanderers, ascetics, Brahmins, samanas in the time of the Buddha, all sorts of different practices going on. Buddha studied with two different teachers, Alara Kalama and Udakarama Putta, before he then set out on his own, thinking, well, they claim enlightenment, but I don't think they have the deathless, which is what I'm seeking. So he already had the barami and the spiritual intuition to see that what those teachers claimed actually wasn't what you would call sama sambodhiyan, which is the right and proper enlightenment. It was just very refined states of samadhi that when you came out of it, the ordinary state of mind was still there. The kilesa, the defilements of attachment, aversion, ignorance, delusion, still there, not uprooted. And then having gone from being a prince with the utmost refinement and pleasure and comfort, now at this point he's going into the greatest self-torment a human could possibly endure without actually dying. And although after the Buddhahood, the Buddha teaches that this type of striving was pointless, there are very inspiring verses that took place, for example, exchanges between the Bodhisatta and Mara while he's in the midst of this immense heroic striving, where his body is so emaciated that he says that he could feel his spine through his stomach. And that his eyes were sunken back like deep wells, and all his body hair fell out, rotted at the roots. So he's got this immense self-denial practice, even doing things like holding his breath as long as he could until his head felt like it was going to split in half. Even things like devas and celestial beings pitying him and offering him celestial food, and the Buddha, the Bodhisatta, saying, if I accept this celestial food from you, how can I claim to be truly fasting? And so he even sends the devas away who try to offer him celestial nourishment infused through his body. And so he reaches this state of extreme emaciation, and Mara comes to him and says, give up this striving. 1,000 parts of you are death, only one part of you clings to life. How can this be? But then the Bodhisatta responding mentally to Mara, saying, well, the more I strive, the more I deny myself, the brighter my mind gets, and I'm encased in only light. And so you get a bit of a insight into what was going on in his mind. But he was even denying jhana, jhanic bliss. So He was any bliss, even that came from meditation, it was pure denial. So any level of bliss that came, his practice was to also deny that and defy that. So this really, really extreme practice that he's doing. And yet this is amazing that he even was willing to go to this extent. And eventually, of course, the Bodhisattva remembering a time when he was a child, when he was 10, either he's 7 or 10, I can't remember. But anyway, this is where it was a harvest festival, and he felt nibbida, so he felt a sense of world weariness even then, and went off to where it was quiet and sat under a tree, a rose apple tree, and went into the first jhana, the first absorption, which is based on seclusion, based on a sense of aloneness and seclusion. And he remembers that and realizes that that could be the path to enlightenment. That why push away a pleasure that's completely blameless, that's not based on sense pleasures? But he couldn't get there. He can't actually get into that state without a nourished body. So he starts the alms round again. Nurses himself back to health, and then he's able to do these much more balanced meditations. Also, as an interesting bit of trivia about the Buddha's life, there's 3 times when the Buddha's father bows to him. And that is, one is when the Bodhisattva was 3 days old, and there's these different Brahmins which are predicting his future, and most of the Brahmins put up 2 fingers, meaning he'll be either a fully enlightened Buddha or a wheel-turning monarch. And then the final Brahmin, who's the youngest, whose name is Kondanya, he puts up 1 finger, predicting that for sure the prince will achieve Buddhahood, will leave the home life and achieve Buddhahood. And at that point, the king actually bows to his son. The second time is when the prince is sitting under the rose apple tree as a child, and he's in this first jhana, and he sits there all day, completely still, upright, and the shadow of the tree, the sun moves, but the shadow of the tree doesn't move. It stays over the prince. And then the king, wondering where his son is gone, goes to see him and notices this phenomenon happening. And that's the second time he bows to him, is when the prince is first absorbed in that meditation. Can't remember the third time he bows to him. I think it might have been either when he heard about his attainment of Buddhahood or when he left home. Or it could have been when he came back. So the Bodhisattva, the ascetic Gautama, he relinquishes his austerities, makes his way to Bodh Gaya, and then he attains enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. And of course, we all know he was inclined not to teach. That's a major part of the story. What he found was so refined, he finally answered his question, what's the point? But the answer and the path leading to the deathless was so refined, and even he reflected it was so hard to see and so kind of undiscernible except by the wise. And he thinks, well, even somebody like me with my barami found this hard to reach. How could people understand this? Then we get the Brahma God Sahampati coming down and requesting, please turn the wheel of the Dhamma. There are people with little dust in their eyes who will understand. Teach the Dhamma, set rolling the wheel of the Dhamma. And then the Buddha surveying the world with his Buddha Chaku, his Buddha eye, which can see all beings in the world, all minds of all beings in the world simultaneously, surveys the world, says, well, there are people who will understand. So that's the beginning of that story. That's the origin of that chant, the Brahmachaloka chant, the Dhamma talk request that we still do today. All these things are linked up. So when we do the practice of Buddho, it can all of these types of reflections can come up and bring inspiration, energy to ourselves. And so, coming back to ourselves, we might feel, well, that's the Buddha. Yeah, he asked what's the point? What are we doing here? He was able to answer the question, but me, I'm pathetic. I can't do this. But I think just that's one of the blessings of having the Buddha as a resource, is that we at least have some sort of direction, some sort of starting point. Saddha. So the faith, we can give rise to a faith. The word saddha in Pali doesn't just mean faith. The same exact word is courage as well. So there's faith and courage is the same thing in the Pali. So we have a direction that we can move. We can orient ourselves in a certain direction. If we have faith, we give rise to faith that these things are real. That gives us the impetus to move in the direction of nibbana, even if we don't have enough barami to attain it in this lifetime, which, even us monks, I'm a monk, I don't know if I have enough barami to attain nibbana in this lifetime, and yet I have faith that there's a direction that can be moved in, which is going to be efficacious, beneficial. And we take on the sila, we start at the beginning. We start with the precepts. This is like the basis for being a human being. Or some people nowadays might ask, well, yeah, I can be a good human being, but what's the point with the crazy situation out there, out in the world? And I think the point is just to be a better human being. Anything that's happening in the world can be the impetus or the reason for us to look deeper, to become more intelligent, to develop more faith, more energy, and more mindfulness, more concentration, more wisdom. We have to rise up to situations. We can't be dependent on having the world be a certain way. We've already got one of the best situations possible in this monastery for practice. So we have a situation already, an external situation where we can support each other, which is, even this type of thing is incredibly rare in the world. And we have it. We have a deva realm of sorts here, so we can make use of this. During the Vasa period, the rains retreat, which we've got 1 more month till the end of the rains retreat. And we have this opportunity to do 2-week retreats. We've been on rotation, so Tan Kachana, Tan Pesalo, and Agarka Mat just got off their 2-week retreats. So this is also a lovely opportunity to get back to our sense of formal practice and solitude and re-inspiring ourselves in the monastic lifestyle, reinvigorating our spiritual faculties. We all get this opportunity. So I think these are all just recollections that can be incredibly helpful, especially when faced with death, death of loved ones, the inevitable, the contemplation that our own death is inevitable. Those very basic, very simple recollections. I am of the nature to sicken. I have not gone beyond sickness. I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. I am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. I am the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, and so on. These come directly from the prince, the Bodhisattva, when he was considering leaving the household life. So we've got these links, these direct links to the Buddha. Everything we have, this monastery, these robes, this all comes from the Buddha's Barami. So we can practice out of a sense of gratitude, out of a sense of wanting to at least offer something to the Buddha. We chant it all the time, but only rarely does it actually hit home. To the Buddha, I dedicate this body and life, and in devotion I will walk the Buddha's path of awakening. The Dhamma, I dedicate this body and life. In devotion I will walk this excellent way of truth. To the Sangha, I dedicate this body and life. In devotion I will walk the well-practiced way of the Sangha. This is just the ordinary evening chanting that we do every day, but the meaning is far from ordinary. This is not normal, not something that a normal person would honestly say and mean it and actually do. But it's powerful if we get into this, if we embrace it. It's very, very powerful. So I'll leave that as a reflection for this evening.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami.